The Captain Underpants movie is an interesting case, to say the least. It released in 2017 to lukewarm reviews. Critics thought it was an average kids movie, but audiences thought it was a good, but not amazing movie. As the years went on, it left its mark on the greater DreamWorks catalog as an underrated but overlooked gem that no one really talks about. But I'm here to change that. If you've seen my video on the books, you'll know that I love this series and I grew up with it, and the same thing holds true here. I watched this movie in theaters when it came out and I wholeheartedly loved it. I thought it was hilarious, I thought it looked great, and I thought it was a great adaptation of the books. But how faithful is it actually? Well, after rereading all the books and rewatching the movie a few times, I think I have an answer. Let's start at the beginning. George is the kid on the left. The plot of this movie is fairly simple, as it should be. There's no time travel here, no. This is classic Captain Underpants action. George and Harold, best friends who create comics together and general mischief makers, get caught pranking a major school event by their principal, Mr. Krupp, and are going to be placed in separate classes. In an attempt to evade this, they hypnotize Mr. Krupp into becoming a superhero they created, the amazing Captain Underpants. This is an interesting main conflict. It's not bad by any means, it's just interesting to take a plot idea from book 11 of all places. Maybe it was changed to make Mr. Krupp seem less cruel and have him not treat George and Harold like slaves? Editor's note, this is almost certainly true. I found a deleted scene that had Mr. Krupp treat them the same way. Deleted, I assume, for pacing and story simplicity or whatever. Also, the hypnosis scene feels over the top, but the legendary Tra-la-la scene more than makes up for it. I feel so much love for the books in just that one scene. Anyway, Mr. Krupp, hypnotized as Captain Underpants, goes on a run around the city to try and stop crime, but causes confusion and destruction. This is a very shortened version of the very first book, and it fits right in, you barely notice it. Mostly because they use very little from the first book's run around the city, but it is inspired by it, and you can tell they really cared about the series. Also, you can see the everything except fabric softener store. George and Harold take Captain Underpants back to their treehouse and learn the way to change him back and forth. The next day, they turn Mr. Krupp into Captain Underpants in the middle of the hallway, and in that moment, they realize they have to prevent everyone from finding out that he's hypnotized, which is hard because Captain Underpants is an idiot. Then, disguised as Mr. Krupp, Captain Underpants meets with a prospective science teacher replacement after his last one quit, and that person just happens to be an evil supervillain named Professor Poopy Pants, who subsequently becomes their new science teacher. Knowing he's clearly evil, George and Harold create a new comic about their teacher after finding out his real name and thinking it's hilarious. Poopy Pants finds out, and just like in George and Harold's comic, recruits their nerd classmate with no sense of humor, Melvin, sneedily to help with his scheme, getting rid of laughter using a giant ray gun that shrinks kids' ha-ha guffaw chuckleomoluses.
The ha-ha guffaw chuckleomelus. Ha-ha guffaw chuckleomelus. This ha-ha guffaw chuckleomelus.
Who are you? Hello? Sorry, I'm watching TikTok. I'm just gonna ignore him. Where was I? Oh, right. The haha guffaw chuckleomolus being the part of the brain that controls laughter, and he wants to get rid of laughter because people always laugh at his name. I love that Poopy Pants gets his plan working because George and Harold know comic logic so well, and their universe operates on comic logic. Of course, the nerd with no sense of humor is the key to make a device that gets rid of laughter. Also, a lot of times in the books, George and Harold accidentally create the enemies they face, so it just works perfectly. He uses his shrinking and growing ray to size up a giant toilet.
Oh my god, skibbity toilet!
What?
It's a skibbity toilet!
What are you even talking about?
Only in Ohio, bro.
Anyway. The toilet is powered by the cafeteria's radioactive waste, and the final fight ensues. Personally, I think the Turbo Toilet 2000 was overkill and they should have saved him for the sequel, and his design is a major downgrade from his book counterpart. A real hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby. George and Harold's childish sense of humor destroys his machine, and Captain Underpants, with newly gained powers, defeats Poopy Pants. But he gets away instead of going to jail like in the book for some reason. George and Harold end the movie learning that even if they're in separate classes, they can still be friends, and that Captain Underpants is more of a liability than he is helpful. They set Mr. Krupp back to normal, and even get him a date. However, during the date, a bunch of toilets come to life and start attacking the city, which also causes Mr. Krupp to turn back into Captain Underpants, and oh no,
Here we go again!
it's a pretty simple plot. It's a combination of Book 1 with the origin of Captain Underpants, Book 2 because the Turbo Toilet 2000 is here, 3 because Captain Underpants gets his powers, 4, of course, with Poopy Pants, and a little bit of 11 thrown in there for good measure. It's a good combination of a lot of things, and they all fit together well, and it has more references in it than you might think. So they essentially nailed the plot. But how'd they do with the characters? First, George and Harold. They're the main characters I have the least to talk about since they're basically as perfect as you can get as far as an adaptation is concerned. Harold's dolphin obsession is a little weird. I don't know if it's the good kind of weird or the bad kind of weird, but it is weird. It's also weird how much more mature book George and Harold are compared to the movie George and Harold. Like, George and Harold in the books knew from the start that Captain Underpants was a liability, and they need him to stay crop as much as possible, yet it takes their movie counterparts basically the entire runtime to figure that out. I don't think that's an issue with the movie, however, because it gives them a character arc now, but still, it's a difference worth noting. I actually really like George and Harold's development in this movie. Seeing them mature into a more recognizable George and Harold by the end is really cool. The voice actors were also something that at first I thought was a bad choice, but actually having them being voiced by adults makes a lot of sense and is better than them being voiced by children or girls doing children voices. Because George and Harold are so mature, okay, well maybe not mature, but they are certainly much more mentally advanced than the average 4th graders, them being played by adults just fits. There's not really more I could ask for out of them. They still make meta jokes, break the fourth wall, and their friendship is endearing, and it's the core of the entire movie. I think it's a little weird that they changed their backstory, but again, it's not a big deal. Now for Mr. Krupp. He's easily my favorite book character because his over-the-top cruelty is hilarious. He's the most consistently funny character in the books for me. As for his movie counterpart, it's still Krupp, he's just a little nerfed, I guess? See, the movie does this weird thing where they humanize Mr. Krupp. Unlike in the book where he's just a mean guy, nothing more to it, the movie heavily implies the reason Mr. Krupp is so mean is because he's lonely. His house is empty and sad, and after he gets the date with Edith the lunch lady, he's nice to George and Harold for once.
And I believe these belong to you. Well, I read them, and considering they're filled with the lowest form of wit, they're actually pretty funny.
On the one hand, it gives depth to the character, which is a good thing, but part of what makes Mr. Krupp great was that he has no depth. He's irredeemably and cartoonishly cruel, but in the movie he's just mean, but it's somewhat justified because he's actually just sad. Obviously he's not like redeemed, he still gets pleasure from poor treatment of his student body, so he's not like a good guy, but he's not as maniacal and straight up evil. This also comes with another negative, since for most of the movie he doesn't even have control over his own body. He's hypnotized to obey George and Harold's every command. Sure, in the books he gets similar treatment, but because he didn't have that depth and felt more like a purely evil demon, it felt somewhat justified. But now, since he's just a poor old sap, it feels a lot more cruel to take over his mind. Like, seriously think about it. He just blacks out and will wake up hours or even days later, sometimes in mortal danger, almost always wearing no clothes. It's not a huge deal, but it's interesting how a small character change to give the character more depth can snowball into creating a much larger problem. But, you know, it's not that deep. At the end of the day, it's Mr. Krupp, and Ed Helms is like perfect casting. I seriously cannot imagine another person playing Mr. Krupp.
Why am I soaking wet?
Cool.
Hey! Tra-la-la! Harold! Tra-la! George!
Originally in the 90s, Chris Farley was going to play Captain Underpants in a live-action TV show adaptation, but those plans fell through. I think Chris Farley would have made a good Captain Underpants, but I don't know about him being Mr. Krupp, but that could just be because I've never really seen anything with Chris Farley in it. Ed Helms does an amazing job as both, though. He's great as Mr. Krupp and Captain Underpants, who, speaking of which, I don't really have much to say about. He's still a lovable goof with absolutely no brains. Now it's time to talk about the worst aspect of the entire movie. No, it's not the dialogue that at times sounds like it was written to be in trailers.
Wow, he is super dumb.
No, it's not the occasionally too modern animated kids movie humor.
Ow! I bet he thought that was going to be cooler.
It's not even the Ofarcher of 1812. No, the worst aspect of this movie is, unfortunately, the main villain. That's right. Professor Poopy Pants is somehow the worst part of the movie. How did they mess up this badly? Well, Poopy Pants in the book was a scientist from New Switzerland who just wanted to help the world with his Shrinky Pig and Goosey Grow, but after being laughed out of all major science jobs and opportunities, he decided to try and teach science to kids. Not for any nefarious purposes, no, he just genuinely loved science and wanted to show children the wonder that science can bring. But since kids couldn't stop laughing at his name, he began to lose it, culminating in his breaking point. George and Harold making a comic about him. So, he decides to take over the world and force everyone to have silly names just like him, because if everyone's name is silly, no one's is. What is he like in the movie? Well, he's cartoonishly and obviously evil from the get-go. He's a maniacal evil scientist with plans for world domination who hates kids and laughter. The only reason he becomes a teacher is to forward his plans. He doesn't even really care about science or helping people anymore. His plan is to get rid of the Ha-Ha Gaffa Chocolomalus and make everyone into humorless zombies. And by the way, the Ha-Ha Gaffa Chocolomalus is stupid. They couldn't even get his shrinking and growing devices right. Why did they consolidate them into one device? And to top it all off, he's voiced by Nick Kroll. His take on the character isn't the worst thing ever, but he doesn't capture the character as well as I'd like. I mean, to be fair, the script for him isn't great, so it's not entirely his fault, but let's be real, it's his fault. How did they essentially nail every character except the villain, turning him into a one-dimensional shell of his book counterpart? Like, sure, Poopy Pants does turn into a maniacally evil supervillain eventually, but only after being beaten down by society over and over. It's an absolute failure on the movie's part, and they fail to capture why Poopy Pants was so compelling in the first place. His motives are wrong, his plans are wrong, he's just plain wrong. Not even his full name is correct.
Professor Pee-Pee Diarrheenstein Poopy Pants Esquire.
And the worst part is that you could easily have him be more book accurate without changing too much. His evil plan doesn't come into fruition until George and Harold make a comic about him, so with a couple minor tweaks, you could easily have him be a much more accurate version of Poopy Pants. I assume they did this to sort of absolve George and Harold of being the reason he turns evil in the first place, since in the books, they kind of bring chaos and ruin the lives of everyone who opposes them.
Because I hate laughter and children, and I've got a cage in a briefcase.
It's so frustrating because it's just a few elements of what should be a great whole, but it's not. I can see the potential, but he just isn't given nearly enough development to be a great villain like in the books. I'm sure they'll bring him back and he'll be great in a potential sequel, but we don't have that yet. It's not terrible, don't get me wrong, but still. Hashtag not my poopy pants. It's insane too, because the director said in the special features commentary that they specifically cut scenes focused on Poopy Pants because they didn't want to spend too much time on characters that aren't the leads. This was a very, very bad decision. I shouldn't have to say why, but a lot of people's biggest criticism of the movie is the lack of development of the main villain. David Zorn, come on!
And why are we spending time on characters that really aren't our leads?
As for the other characters in this movie, well, Melvin is obsessed with extra credit, which isn't too far a departure from his book counterpart, so I'll allow it. Though he doesn't seem to have nearly as much pure, unbridled hatred for George and Harold as he does in the books. There's Edith, who's now a lunch lady and the love interest for Mr. Krupp, and she hardly had a role in the books and was briefly a love interest for Captain Underpants, so the slight changes they made aren't that big of a deal. While editing, I found out that there's actually two characters in the movie named Edith. One is the secretary, who is Misanthrope, and then Edith the lunch lady, who's completely different, so that's interesting. The other teachers don't do much, so it doesn't really matter. I like the joke when George and Harold are in separate classes and both their teachers are reading monotone from their books in sync. Not really important to their characters, I just think it's funny.
Do not interrupt while I'm reading monotone from my textbook.
Overall, I'd say that, minus one notable exception, they did a pretty good job adapting the characters from the book. I have a few problems with a couple of them, but other than Poopy Pants, they're not that big of a deal. I mean, the small things do add up somewhat, but it's not enough to hinder my enjoyment of the movie at all. They're close enough that, with one exception, they're all more or less the characters from the books. Speaking of things mostly well adapted from the source material, the humor. This is a comedy movie after all. I think this movie is pretty funny. There are plenty of lines that still get me to laugh even though I've seen the movie like a dozen times.
Get an ice cream sandwich?
Just scram, okay? We're closed for Ebola.
The movie at times captures the sense of humor from the books. I especially love the nods to the sign letter gag, but it can also be funny while not emulating the book's humor style at all.
And who could forget Sad Worm? It was a worm who was sad. That one's still a work in progress.
Captain Underpants in general has always nailed potty humor in a way that doesn't feel mindless and can be enjoyed by all ages, and this movie is no exception, aside from that one scene. Still though, a lot of the jokes are really great. However, there's also plenty of jokes that are a little too modern animated kids movie-esque for my taste.
Oh, really, Oprah? Is that my problem?
There's also times where lines of dialogue feel like they were specifically written and delivered to be put into trailers. Like,
Wow, that's an expensive door.
watch any of the trailers for the movie and you'll see exactly what I mean. You think, oh, the dialogue feels weird and stilted because it's a trailer. Then you watch the movie and are like, oh, no, it's just like that. It's unfortunate, but what are you gonna do? Another slightly bothersome thing about this movie is the pacing. It really could use an extra 5 to 10 minutes or so to breathe. You know, you don't have to have your movie be exactly an hour and a half, or in this movie's case, an hour and 29 minutes. I mean, the movie doesn't have to be 2 hours long, that's not what I'm saying, but a little extra time can go a long way. While it is fast-paced by design, it is a little too fast-paced, leaving you wanting more at the end. It also spends way too much time on the trying to hide Captain Underpants from people stuff. It sets up this plot thread of Mr. Crap accidentally unhypnotizing himself with the water gun, but all it amounts to is Mr. Crap being confused for a few seconds before turning back into Captain Underpants. Admittedly a funny scene, yes, but this and other similar scenes could easily be time better spent doing other things, like developing Poopy Pants. However, if there's one thing everyone and their mom can agree on, it's that this movie looks awesome. Most of the time when you hear a movie is being outsourced outside of the company's main animation pipeline, it basically spells disaster because it's gonna look very cheap. And sure, you could objectively say this movie's look is a little cheap, but it also captures the book's style very well. Mr. Crap and Poopy Pants especially look really great. I like how all the backgrounds have non-straight lines, and as one of the first major stylized 3D animated movies, it's very impressive, especially on a budget of only $38 million, being cheaper to produce than its spiritual predecessor, in my eyes, the Peanuts movie, and well, Into the Spider-Verse isn't a spiritual successor, it's basically the next major stylized 3D animated movie. And I'm not gonna say the Captain Underpants movie looks better than Spider-Verse, I'm not insane. I just think it's impressive it looks this good on this budget, and you gotta imagine a large portion of the budget went into the star-studded cast. Another great thing about this movie's look is how often it experiments with its styles. You've got a cool, crayon-looking 2D opener, emulating Harold's art style, though being less Harold art and more, oh my Izzy. There's also an honest-to-God sock puppet scene, which is such a cool thing to put in. They even do a fliporama. The movie just looks great overall. Sure, it could maybe look a little bit better, but it's not really anything to complain about in my opinion. I love the look of the 2D pencil test, but it's not like the 3D animation is significantly worse to a point that I'm disappointed we didn't get it. Like, I'm a little disappointed because they do look amazing, but the 3D looks amazing too, so who's complaining? Certainly not me. On another note, this movie's use of music is outstanding. The way they use leitmotifs in the score, whether it's the friendship motif to represent George and Harold's, well, friendship, to the Captain Underpants theme based on, of course, the Weird Al song made for the movie, which is an absolute banger. I listen to it all the time.
Here is mighty battle cry. La la la. Hey, watch out, crime. It's wedgie power time. Na 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 na. Captain Underpants. Yeah yeah yeah.
Faster than a speeding waistband.
He's busting down doors. We're wearing just his drawers. Na 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 na. Captain Underpants. Yeah yeah yeah.
More powerful than boxer shorts.
And I know I'm the last one to point this out, but Weird Al is mentioned in the books as something George and Harold enjoy, so to get him to make the main theme for the movie is just perfect. Poopy Pants' theme is also great. I just wish Poopy Pants himself was better. This movie is also a light musical, meaning the characters will burst out into song sometimes, but it only happens a couple of times during the Saturday song
I love Saturday.
or the Hallelujah segment. No, not that DreamWorks Hallelujah segment, the other one.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Also, I just noticed this while writing this segment on Saturday, but George and Harold's pajamas having the aliens and Dr. Diaper's robots on them respectively is just awesome. There's so many little details like that all over the movie. The other songs on the soundtrack range from pretty good to kind of bad, since it has a bunch of mid-pop songs on it. I like A Friend Like You, in the context of the movie, otherwise it's just kind of okay. I don't get why they got Lil Yachty to make a remix of Oh Yeah with perhaps the worst rap lyrics I've ever heard in my life, but they did.
Bow bow.
I'm cool, super cool. Ladies see me, they chew. Yeah, I act a fool in school and pass my test because I'm cool. I'm too cool for you. I could've followed rules, but I didn't cause I couldn't. I was busy being cool.
The non-cast version of Saturday is fine, it's just kind of generic. It's a good thing that most of these are exclusive to the soundtrack album or the credits, so I never have to listen to them ever again. The audio editing kind of sucks, I noticed. I don't know where else to talk about it, so I put it here. Oh boy, I sure am excited to see the sequel to the Captain Underpants movie. If you were hoping for a Captain Underpants sequel, I have bad news for you. Unfortunately, the movie didn't gross a ton of money, only making $125 million worldwide. Sounds like a lot, especially on a budget of only $38 million like I mentioned earlier, but it's not enough of a profit to instantly greenlight a sequel, like with, say, Shrek, Madagascar, or Kung Fu Panda. The worst part is that it probably would have done better if it wasn't released in an extremely packed theater season. I mean, the movie released in the same season as Cars 3, a new Transformers movie, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and it even released on the same day as Wonder Woman, all of which outperformed Captain Underpants. Between this and the fact it was animated outside of DreamWorks' normal animated pipeline, being done cheaply in Canada, you could make the argument that this movie was set up to fail. Still though, it wasn't a flop, not even close. So what gives? Well, Captain Underpants was the last film distributed by 20th Century Fox. After that, NBC Universal took over, and I assume they looked at the lukewarm performance of the Captain Underpants movie and decided to greenlight a budget Netflix show in lieu of a sequel, which, in my opinion, was a mistake. I know they wanted to experiment with streaming shows and they have a deal with Netflix to produce a certain amount of content for them, but still. A Captain Underpants sequel would have been huge. Sequels almost always make more money, and since Captain Underpants was already cheap to produce and they got a final product that looked that good, a bit of a budget increase into a slightly longer sequel probably would have made them bank. I'm not a market analyst though, I'm just some guy on YouTube. And it's not like movies with Netflix shows can't get sequels. Look at Trolls and Boss Baby. Though, if you compare their box office numbers, it makes a little more sense. I know they're supposedly making that Dogman film that releases in a year, and some have argued that's a better step forward for adapting Dav Pilkey books, but I disagree. Sure, Dogman is extremely popular and the movie is going to succeed, but Dogman isn't as popular as Captain Underpants, at least not with the older demographic. And Dogman isn't a household name in the same way Captain Underpants is. Everyone knows Captain Underpants. Dogman isn't nearly as beloved, at least from what I can tell. Speaking of the Netflix show, I haven't watched it, and it will probably be the last Dav Pilkey thing I cover on this channel because I'm putting off watching it. Please don't make me watch it. I'm gonna have to. Overall, though this movie does have several issues, some character assassination, some pacing issues, some bad dialogue, and others. Okay, you know what? No. The Overture of 1812 is not that bad of a scene. It's perfectly in character for George and Harold, which is the target audience of the movie, kids like George and Harold, and it was so good that it was gonna be ripped off in Barbie? Anyway, it's still a great adaptation of the books. It really feels like the people making the movie had passion for the source material. This video is a little focused on the negatives, but I must say, they did an excellent job of capturing the spirit of the books and the magic of being a kid, which, to me, is what Captain Underpants is really about. The series recaptures that feeling of being a kid and makes you feel like George and Harold. This movie isn't perfect, and that's okay. It's still a phenomenal tribute to Captain Underpants and Dav Pilkey's work, and for that, it gets a 9 out of 10 from me. If this stays the only Captain Underpants movie, aside from that Dogman movie that's coming out apparently, I'd be perfectly fine with that. Is this a perfect adaptation? No. But it wasn't trying to be, and that's okay. Next up in the Pilkeyverse, Super Diaper Baby. See you next time.